Oh man, I love it when a plan comes together. So, floppy drive controller that was a bare board and now it's all built up. This is Sergey Kiselev's ISA Floppy Drive Controller and serial port. This is three things in one. It is a floppy controller card, obviously, because that's why it's called a floppy controller. It's a serial port card, obviously, because it's called a serial port card. But the third thing is it has its own built-in, or where is it? Right there. Its own built-in BIOS, so it actually knows how to control the floppies itself. So you can put it into a machine that doesn't have a proper floppy BIOS and actually use more modern floppy drives. So the goal was to get a 1.44 meg 3.5-inch floppy disk drive into the compact portable, and we did it. So stick around and see how it's done. I have a video linked up above for how to get the BIOS controlled, so we can skip that part in this video. We're going to do all the soldering on it, and then we're going to put it in the machine and test it out and make sure that it boots. So pretty slick. Stick around. Oh hey, one more thing. I got a friend that tells me that it'll make you happy if you click all the buttons down below. The join button, the like button, the subscribe button, ringing the bell, all that fantastic stuff down below. When he told me that, I already clicked all the buttons on his channel, so I don't have any idea. So go ahead and click them and let me know. Okay, so I got a pro tip coming up for you for ordering from Mouser in the future for projects like this. This is what happens when you try to get something better than what Mouser can do, because you really normally can't get anything better than what Mouser can do. So stick around for the end when we get into that, but let's get into these boxes and see what is in these boxes. I made the mistake of ordering things that were out of stock, and so that's why I have all of these boxes of things to deal with. Okay, I kind of opened the bag a little bit. Yep, I opened the bag a little bit. No worries. Nothing in the bag. Let's sort the obvious stuff. Capacitor, crystal, capacitor, capacitor. That's a bunch of chips. That is a serial port ISA card header. This is resistor networks. This is chip socket. We'll put chip socket and chips together. That's the resistor network I already picked up. Nope, that's another resistor network. Two resistor networks. It's another chip, put that over with the chips. What is this? This is a chip socket, put that over with the chips. Dip switches, dual inline package switches. Those are screws, and I think these are the screws that hold the serial port onto the board. But we'll find out. We'll put them over there with that. There is the serial port itself. There is another chip. Clock oscillators, another clock. Another chip. And what is this? Logic comparators. So this should be another chip. Awesome. Okay, and what else do we have? Where did it go? Alright, these are chips I had in stock from previous projects or previous purchases. Sometimes it makes sense to buy stuff in bulk, and sometimes I just want to have the parts that I need for the project and nothing else. Because I have a feeling that one of these days I'm just going to have a box of, like, this is 50 volt, 22 picofarad, multi-layer ceramic capacitors, and I just don't know that I'm ever going to use those again, and I don't know that I'm not ever going to use them again. I don't really know what the over-under is on that. And right now, right or wrong, my philosophy is Mouser is a fantastic place to store this stuff. So, no problems there. Alright, so we've got sockets for the board. I've got some more sockets to put in. I've got some passives to put in. I've got some pin headers already. Okay, so the next thing that we got to do is go over the parts manifest here, and there'll be a link to this in the description down below, and make sure that we have all of the parts that we believe that we should have. So part number 1 here is the PCB, which I have, so I will make a checkbox, and I'll make the checkbox over on this side for on hand. And then that's the PCB. And then this is the next part here, which is the floppy disk controller itself, PC8477BV-1, PC8477BV-1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the whole rest of this sheet, and then we'll move on to the next step in the build process. Okay, so now we have all of the parts identified that we're going to need. There is one part that I crossed out, and that is this capacitor C17. It says this capacitor is only required for the Intel 82077 AA floppy disk controller FDC. I'm not using that. I'm using the National Semiconductor version, so I'm not going to put that in. Other than that, we actually have all of the parts. So the next thing to do is to go through and figure out how to put these on the board in the easiest possible manner. And the trick that everybody talks about is putting them on from lowest components to highest components. Lowest closest to the circuit board versus highest higher up from the circuit board. And honestly, for the most part, these are all the same height. Your chip sockets are going to be the same height as your, wherever they went, as your capacitors when they're fully installed. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with all of the capacitors first, and then work my way up from there. Turn on my soldering iron. I'm using the Hakko FX888D. If you've been following along with what we've been doing, I have an old Hakko FX888D I've had for a couple of years now. I have put some miles on that particular soldering iron, and it's been a trooper, but I have burnt it out, and I looked into replacing the thermistor, the controller board that's in here, and the new one came in, and the new one specs out okay, and the old one specs out okay, so that's not the problem. I don't even know where this thing's going. Out of the factory, this thing's still climbing up at 750. 750 is what it stopped at. Alright, I don't like 750. I am going to solder at 640. So let me change that over to 640 Fahrenheit. And it will lower its temperature back down, and we will give it a shot and see if this solves the problem. And then I will get out a little test project. And there's only 2 buttons on the front, and I got it backwards. I don't know what I just did, but I gave it a adjustment, and the numbers moved, and then they moved right back to where it was. So let me do it the other way around. Okay, so if you hold the up button down, it says adjust, and then you adjust it to the temperature you want. The numbers fluctuate, and then it lands back on where it was supposed to be in the first place. If you hold down the enter button, it just goes straight into adjusting the numbers. I changed the numbers, and I pressed enter again, and now it's slowly bringing its temperature back down. As for solder, I use this Kester solder, and it doesn't really even say Kester 44, and this is like the 6739 or whatever the math works out. This has actually got lead in it, and it's got a little more lead in it than your average amount of solder, and I find that it works out really well. Normally I do not do this on paper. I'm trying something different today because there's not a whole lot of parts to put on this board. I have had projects in the past where there are just tons and tons and tons of parts. What I'm going to do with this one here is I am going to cross off the parts as I put them on. So I already went through and inventoried them all. Normally what I do is I go through and I just change the color codes. So you can, I don't know if you'll be able to see that on camera, but this one here doesn't have any color code, and this one here is slightly shaded because I didn't print it in color, because why waste the color? I'll go through and I'll clear all that out, and then I'll just go through and highlight them in a different color. But I figured for today I would print these guys out and use it as a teaching aid for the video. So now we need to go through and do the lower components first. He's got these things all sorted by what type of component they are, which is really nice. So I'm going to put in all of the capacitors first and get those checked off. So what do we have here? We have a 10 pack, and we have a 10 pack. So that must be the right ones, right? And there aren't any resistors on this, just a couple of resistor packs, which is pretty nice. Okay, C1 through C10. And now to find them on the board. And I'm going to do these in number order just to make sure that I don't miss anything. C1. And these are tantalum capacitors, so there isn't really any, what's it called? There isn't any polarity to them. You just put them on and you're good to go. And I'm going to get my danger glasses on because I want to see if there's any writing on these guys. Yep. And in this lighting I can tell there's a little bit of black on one side. I can't really make it out because the camera lights are way too bright, versus no writing on the other side. And all I want to do from a craftsman perspective, from an artisan perspective, is make sure that these are all going in the right direction. So there's C1, now I'm looking for C2. And call it out when you find it. There it is, C2. Thanks. And what you can do is put these in, and when they're in on the back side of the board, do a little fold over of the legs, and that makes it so that they don't come back out. There's C2, let's find C3. And another trick you can do with these guys, if you're looking through your parts bin and trying to find which part is which, take a picture with your cell phone and then you can zoom in to be able to read that text. And Sergey's done a really good job on these boards. All of the components are laid out and they are all written down with what they should hold. So for instance, I'm looking for C8 and I'll find C8 on the board and it says 0.1 microfarad capacitor. So as long as I find a capacitor that fits that footprint, that space in between the two chips, it doesn't even have to be a tantalum capacitor, which are these guys. It could be a electrolytic capacitor, which are usually the little soda can looking ones. As long as it fits, it sits. And what you want to do with your soldering iron is get a little bit of solder on the tip. It comes from the factory with some solder on the tip. I'm going to put some fresh solder onto it. And I'm going to clean it off real quick and get her nice and shiny. So I've got the factory blob off of it. Now I'm going to put a little bit of solder on my own. It's called tinning your tip. And what that does is it takes up the space between the tip and the board and the component leg so that you get a better heat transfer. And this is definitely one of those things that you stress out with up front to make sure that you're doing it right, because you don't even know what right looks like. And then you get to do a bunch of these. And you can watch old Ben Heck solder on his channel, and he just slobs all the way across the board and does a fantastic job. Because he knows all the tricks and techniques for cleaning up after himself. sure old Ben has soldered a hell of a lot more things than I have. Alright, now you take a look at your solder joints, make sure you didn't miss anything, make sure they all look pretty good. Touch up the ones that don't look all that good. And then I clean the tip off of my soldering iron. My soldering station has this soldering iron holder, and it has this cleaning tool, and it also has this sponge part. I don't like this sponge part, so I don't use it anymore. When I first started out, I was using it a lot, not anymore. There's my pen, got my pen. I'm going to check off over here that I have put those parts on, and then I'm going to get my side cutters, and these are only used for this kind of work. And I'm going to cut these guys, flush cutters, side cutters. I think they're called flush cutters. And then for some reason, unknown to me, I always wind up keeping these little solder legs. So that's my bin of solder legs and other assorted used parts. Okay, that bag is empty, those parts are on. And sometimes when I cut these guys, I cut them a little too close, and I cut into the solder a bit. And you can just come back and reflow that solder, and you look like a pro. And then this is also a good time to, once again, check to make sure that you've gotten everything put together like you should. Looks good. And then another thing that you should do at this point is get yourself some flux remover and clean off the board. So you'll see, like this one here, I don't know if you'll be able to see that on the camera or not, there's a little black blob there, and that's just flux. Flux helps make the solder flow better, and I'm going to put a whole bunch more parts on this, so I'm going to save the cleaning until the end. Next up is some more capacitors, and we have 4 of them, and that looks like these ones, and then we have 2, and that looks like those ones. So these are definitely the ones that we're doing next. And this is C11, 12, 13, and 14. And I'm just going to line the writing up, because these are also tantalum capacitors. I'm going to line the writing up pointing in that direction because I can, not because of any other reason whatsoever. C11. And that one is still not being done because it is still the wrong floppy disk controller. Next up, resistor arrays. And they're up here, and these are heavily packed and well cared for some reason. Six-pin resistor array is RR2. And on resistor arrays, let's see if I can find it on the board, there's RR1 and there is RR2. On the board you will see that there is a special pin that is indicated. It's got a little square around it. And on the resistor array there should be some writing. Yep. And on this side there is some writing, and there's a little dot on the end there to indicate that that is pin 1. And so you line up the dot with the special mark on the board. So the special mark on the resistor pack lines up with the special mark on the board. And then I take a little piece of leftover tape from a previous project and stick it to the board, and that stops it from falling out. And then we get our soldering iron out. And try to find the thing we just lost. There it is. And on the back side of the board, you can even tell by looking at it the via that the part goes through. Pin 1 has got a square pin on it, a square hole, a square outline of metal, and the rest are round. And so what I did first was I tacked it down, and then I took a look at it to make sure that it looked good and it was lined up nice and was pretty. and double check my work, and then I'm going to go back and put the rest of those pins in place. And then these guys are so small that I don't trim them. I just let them lay. Takes care of that one. And this is the exact same thing, except it is a 10-pin version, so I'm looking for the writing in the dot, which is right there, and I'm looking for the special part on the board, which is right there. Put it in, grab our piece of tape, tape it down so it doesn't fall out. Get some solder on one part of it. Take the tape off, check it out. And that looks pretty good as is. And we'll check that one off. Alright, we got switches, pin headers, serial port, socket, socket, socket. Alright, we'll put the crystal on next. Megahertz, 12 picofarads, yep. And as far as I know, these don't have any orientation either. I'm just going to put it in the way that the writing looks pretty on the board. Do the same thing with my tape trick. And the tape fell off. Perfect.
It's only been 5 minutes.
You guys were talking to each other. I got the peanut gallery watching me from the window in the other room. Light's playing tricks on my eyes with this one. I'm just going to give it a little touch up real quick. And then that crystal's nice and flush with the board and looks pretty, so we'll cross that off. Okay, we're going to leave the bracket out, we're going to leave the screw out. So, speaking of peanut gallery, you're making a whole bunch of noise in the other room. Okay, so next up is sockets. Let's do some sockets. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do sockets. One of the things that I like to do, because I'm weird like that, is I've put the solder back on the solder bale, and I get a little bit more than normal on the tip of my soldering iron. And I hold it in place with my finger, and then I just tack it down. And now it's being stubborn because I'm trying to show something. And I can tell when I let go with my finger that I've only got one side of that done. There, now I've got both sides done. And what I'll do is I will try some magic zoom on the camera. And we will solder the rest of this one in. All right, there it is. All right, let's zoom out again. And we will do the next socket. Let's do this one a different way. I'm just going to sit it in, and I'm going to sit it down on the bench. And I know it's not in all the way or anything like that. I'm not worried about it. Okay, so we got one side in and nothing else. So I'm going to reheat that and hold it down a bit. Okay, I wasn't holding it flat. Okay. So what I just wound up doing was I was pushing wrong on the socket, and I moved the, see if I can get it back out. I moved the pin inside of the socket out. So if you look, I don't know if you'll be able to see that or not, but if you look, this one pin here on the end is out too far. It needs to not be out that far. So let's see if we can pull it back through. There we go. And now I got some dirty solder on that leg, so I'm gonna give it a nice clean wipe. And and then we'll put it back in. When you're putting sockets in, there is a little notch on the end of the socket to indicate which side pin 1 goes towards. There's a notch on the board to indicate which side pin 1 goes towards. So you want to line all that up. Now this hole in the circuit board was full of solder and it didn't want to go in at all. So there, now it's nice and flat and flush. Looking good. And I'll solder it the rest of the way. And I'm going to start by tacking the other corner and double checking. Yep. And now we'll do the rest. Okay, and there is 2 different ways of putting in sockets. I'm going to show you a third way, and as part of this third way, I'm going to do them all on a speedy little montage after we get it set up. That one's almost holding itself in. What we'll do is we'll put that down there, or we'll just let it fall. Okay, so I have some tape that's left over from doing this a couple of times before, and what I'm going to do is tape the sockets down. And then after taping them down, I am going to attach one of each corner. And take all the tape off. I'm going to make sure that they're all flush, and then I'm going to solder the whole rest of them home. So stick around and watch me speed through this. So that was a whole bunch of sockets. Let's find them on the sheet here. U3 and U5. There's U5, there's U3. Those ones are done. U4 is the big one. That's done. U6 and U7 are right here. Those 2 are done. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Something's not adding up, right? U3, U5, U3, U5, U4, U6, U7, U8. U8's on the next page. That's why it's not adding up, right? There we go. Alright, that's good. What is left? We got some more sockets, some different size and shape sockets. Now I gotta find them. There's one. And there's 2. Okay, so these sockets here are dip sockets, dual inline package. And these are PLCC sockets. And I don't even know what PLCC stands for. And it's kind of obvious where these go. And these have the same kind of detail on them. There is a notch cut out of the corner. There's a notch cut out of the corner of the footprint. So that's the way that you put it in, and that's how you figure out what pin 1 is. So there's one of those. I'm going to do these one at a time. And this time I'm going to do that same trick where I tack the end down with a blob of solder. Because I don't think the tape is going to do me justice on this. Alright, I just picked 2 pins at random and I put some solder on them. And that looks like it's holding. Now I will put in a completely different pin. Okay, I'm running out of parts here. I need a 17 by 2 header and I need a 2-pin header. Getting pretty busy. So let's do this 2-pin header, 17 JP1, 2-pin header. Where's JP1? JP1's up here. So what I'm going to do is take one of these standard pin header deals and I'm going to cut off two pins. Okay, that takes care of that one. And this next one is the pin header where the floppy drive controller cable goes. And I have some leftover pin headers from another project, so I'm just going to reuse some of them. And I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes filled. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Double check my count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. As it shoots across the room. And I will clean this up nice and pretty like. And then I have a trick for making sure that this all stays aligned, which isn't going to be too hard because it's a 2-pin row anyway. Okay, so my trick for keeping these aligned is to take my ribbon cable that I'm going to plug into it and plug it in. And now, it's not going anywhere. And that's exactly the way that it's supposed to be. Now that floppy ribbon cable is going to fight me on getting this thing plugged in, so I'm going to do that same single tack trick. Okay, we got one corner in, sloppy, but it's in. Okay, we got the other corner in. Okay, and I put a little more solder on it than usual because this connector is going to get a workout. And there it is. And unless you know what you're looking for, you can't really tell that it's two separate pieces. I mean, I'm even having trouble looking at it here without looking through the camera lens. Okay, so that's good. Next up, what do we have? Let's put this serial connector on. And this is going to get the same treatment because this is going to be something that gets a lot of use. This is actually probably going to be intended to get even more use than your ribbon cable header will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a blob of solder on a pin there and double check it. But these two big holes here are actually spring-loaded, so they're holding it in place anyway. So now I want to blob a whole bunch of solder on this to fill this hole in. And it's just puking its little rosin guts out. And I probably should have put the dip switches on first, but I didn't. I guess that makes me the dip. That's interesting. So he spec'd out the screws, but he didn't spec out the nuts that go on the other end of the screws. Huh. So this bracket is going to get held on by screws going through the back of the serial port, through the bracket. I'll just pull it out. But what normally happens is there's a socket there that you can use your thumb screws on your serial port to screw into. So I need to get those sockets. I probably have some laying around. And that will finish this job up nicely. Okay, what do we got left? We have dip switches. And these things here work out the same way, except they actually have the number 1 on them, which goes towards pin 1, which goes towards the groove in the socket. Huh, I have some solder in that hole where this wants to go. And that's why that's not wanting to go in so easy. That worked out pretty well. I'm going to try that on purpose and see if we learned a new trick right now. So I'm going to put a little bit of solder in that hole. And then I will warm it back up and let the package fall through. And that may be able to go down a little bit more, I don't know. Nope, that looks good. Okay, there we go. That was neat, I like that. I might use that more often. And as you've seen while I'm doing this, I find pins that don't look as pretty as I want them to look, so I add a little bit more solder to them. And that happens because of the light that I've got going on here. Different angles provide different shadows and reflections and stuff. So you'll see different things as you're working through the process. Two sets of dip switches installed. This card's looking pretty good. Where are they? Right there. Is there anything left on this page? Crystal oscillator. I didn't check that off, but I did do it. No, I didn't do it. This oscillator is only required for the serial port function. And this goes in U8, which goes in that socket. So I gotta find that. I did the socket, I didn't do the oscillator. And this has got the same setup. It's got a pin 1 indicator on it, and it's going in a 14-pin socket, but that's only because of the spacing. There you go, that's installed. Alright, so that page is fully checked off and done. Next up is all of the sockets. All of the sockets. Fill all of the sockets. Alright, what is this? This is a EEPROM that's going to go there. I have a video on how to program EEPROMs linked up above, so we'll take care of that. Let's save that one for later. What do we have? This is 75 series logic 185N. And where does the 185N go? Notch in the chip lines up with the notch in the socket, lines up with the silk screen on the board. That's how you know you've got it right. And sometimes you need to squeeze these in ever so slightly. Alright, that's done. Where'd my pen go? There it is. U3. I am going to eat some dinner, and then I'm going to program the EEPROM, and then we are good to go on testing. Okay, so this is an interesting camera setup for the video. What we've got right here is the compact portable machine, and I've got Sergey's floppy controller all fully built and ready to test out. And I have the 3.5-inch floppy disk drive ready to roll with a DOS 6.22 boot disk in. I have switch 1 set up for the serial port. Serial port is on IRQ4, and the serial port address is 03F8. Yes, 03F8, which means switch 2 is on and switch 8 is on, and the rest are all off. And then for the switch 2 bank, switch 1 is on to enable the ROM, and then the switch 2 is off because we don't want to write to the ROM. I don't know what that's about. There's not really a lot of documentation on that. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 control the address. If you remember from the earlier video, there was a plus hard card 20 in there. I took this out, and since I took this out, I know that the address that it was on and working on is free, so I set this to the address that the plus hard card would have used, which was CA00. And you set that over here on these jumpers, and then finally the last setting here is not used at all. So let's get this out of the way and let's break into the machine. All you need to do is use your fingernails if you have them, and slowly work your way across the back side here. And eventually it will pop off. There we go. Get that out of the way, and what we have is the original floppy controller card in here, which does not support advanced media options, and the screw for this is really weird. It's on the back. These first 2 slots in the compact portable are special slots, and I don't know what's worse, compact using Torx screws all the time or compact using flathead screws all the time. So let's get this unscrewed. And be careful not to lose your screws. And then I'm going to pull out the ribbon cable, which has a little nifty, handy-dandy flip-up arrangement. I'll show that to you in a second. So it's got these little flip-up ears on it to make it easy to get the cable out. And then this card also has a parallel port on it, so I'm going to lose a parallel port. We will do something. We will do something to get that back in the future. And next, this is the video card. I'm going to pull the video card out to make some room for my hands to fit down in there. And then we'll put the video card back in. Alright, so out comes the video card. That's a monster card. Out comes the video card. I need a power connector, so I'm going to steal a Molex plug from one of the floppy drives, and I need an adapter cable, so we plug in the adapter cable here, and that's got a loose wire in it. Not anymore. Alright, that's good. So now what I need to do is get my floppy drive and plug its power cable in, and then I will put the video card back in. That way I don't lose that back down inside of the machine. My video card is seated, and I am going to temporarily install the controller card over in this slot here. Pull out that slot cover. Let's put in the floppy controller. Let's plug it in. Put the floppy drive in, and let's get the camera rearranged so we can see this thing boot up. Alright, the moment of truth. We've got the screen here to be looking at, and we've got the floppy disk drive up here to boot off of. Let's see what happens. I'm going to speed this up a little bit because it takes it a while to get through all the memory. Alright, multi-floppy BIOS. Drive 0, 1.44 meg, 3.5 inch disk. Press F2 if I had a keyboard. I don't, so I'm not. Starting MS-DOS. There we go. Woohoo! HiMemSys says not installed because it can't run on this old of a machine. And it's going to try and load the CD-ROM driver. And there's no CD-ROM. So that's as good a place as any to turn this thing off. But it works! Alright, that was a fantastic build. Before we get too far, I want to get to the part of the tip, the trick, the hack from earlier in the video about Mouser. Mouser is an awesome place to get parts from. What I had to do with this build was put a whole bunch of stuff in the cart, find out that a bunch of it was back ordered, and I forgot a couple of parts and so on. And I paid with PayPal. Nothing wrong with PayPal, that's not where I'm going with this. If you order at Mouser and you pay with a credit card, they can edit your order. And they can't do that if you pay with PayPal. So, pro tip is pay with a credit card. And if there's any questions or any problems or any issues with your order, you can call them up and get it fixed. Second tip for Mouser is if a part is out of stock or back ordered, you can call them and say, please substitute for a valid part. Mouser's got like 10,000 capacitors. And their website's not the easiest in the world to navigate when it comes to finding the parts that you need. And I was using the part page, scroll down to the bottom of the part page, and there's a spot where you can check off a bunch of checkboxes as to what you're looking for lead spacing and part type and component values and so on, and you hit search and it comes back with 0 results. I know that's not true. So something I was doing wasn't working right, and they were able to get it straightened out on the phone. But because I paid with PayPal, I had to get those 3 different boxes, and those 3 different boxes came with 3 different shipping charges. I would have saved quite a bit of money if I had just done a credit card payment and took care of it in one shot using the call them on the phone and edit the order hack. It was $12 per shipping? Or, no, it was $8 per shipping times 3. So that's some savings right there, especially considering that some of these parts are, a couple of pennies a piece. The capacitors are like 13 cents a piece or something like that. Getting this thing into the compact and getting it all set up was fantastic. It did take a little bit of finagling. mostly because the compact has a reset circuit in it that if it loses power, you have to wait 15 seconds for it to unlatch some relay inside that's put in there to protect it from power surges. Pretty slick little thing, but when you've got the 15-second delay for the power cycle and then you have the RAM count in absolute silence, it takes some time. Luckily, I remembered that the Plus hard card was in there and it was bootable and it did have an address, so I looked up its address and programmed it in and got it rolling. But for a minute there, I was scrolling around eBay looking for old 286 and XT class machines to be able to have another test bed, maybe get some more feedback, maybe use a regular keyboard, etc., because I don't have any other test beds, and those things are hard to find. They're either priced out of the market at ridiculous levels that no one will pay for, and nobody does, or they just are, wasting their lives away unused under a workbench in a garage somewhere. So if you have one, let me know, or if you have any floppy disks 5 1/4 or 3 1/2, because I don't have any 5 1/4 inch floppy disks to test this machine out with, let me know. I would love to put those on the channel and bring them back to life and then use them for testing out stuff like this. So this was a fantastic project. It took me about an hour to solder this thing up. Maybe an extra hour on top of that to add in all the camera work and then a couple of hours worth of editing. So I think this is totally doable at an hour. I did get a new soldering iron. If you saw the dummy load video, that was a disaster. And my soldering iron was broken, so I ordered another one. I've got a friend looking at it, and we're going to see what it's going to take to get it fixed. And I will give you an update as soon as I get some information on that one. But in the meantime, thanks for being awesome, and we'll see you in the next one.